rain poured endlessly over the silent town, hammering rooftops and rattling windows as midnight settled in. Streetlights flickered against the storm, their glow swallowed by shadows that moved too strangely to be cast by wind. Puddles on the cracked road shimmered with distorted reflections, faces that vanished when looked at directly. A church bell tolled once in the distance, though no hour had struck, and beneath the thunder came a low, impossible chorus of whispers, rising and falling as if the night itself were breathing. At the far end of the street, a lone figure stood motionless in the rain, watching, waiting, yet disappeared with the crack of lightning. A voice intrudes, steady and cold. Tonight, you are not safe. You are entering a storm that has taken many before you. 50 moments of terror await, bound by rain, by silence, and by the ghosts that find you when you are most alone. The rain hammered the roof as Claire crept through the hallway, her footsteps barely audible over the storm. Wallpaper peeled in jagged strips, dripping with moisture, and the air smelled of rot and mildew. She held her phone in front of her, its weak beam cutting a narrow path of light through the gloom. The reflections in the rain-streaked windows unsettled her. The glass showed her face, but in one fleeting flash, it showed something else. A tall, skeletal figure with hollow, glowing eyes standing just behind her. She spun around, her heart racing, but the hallway was empty. A sudden gust extinguished the lone candle on a table, plunging the house into near darkness. Claire's phone light sputtered, and in that flicker, she noticed a fresh, wet handprint sliding down the wall beside her. A whisper slithered through the silence, low and deliberate. "You shouldn't be here." Her breath caught, frozen between fight and flight. Claire's pulse thudded in her ears as she edged deeper into the house, the storm outside roaring like an angry beast. The hallway narrowed into a staircase, its wooden steps warped and swollen from years of damp. She hesitated, her phone beam trembling across the banister, where fresh droplets of water glistened, as if someone had just passed. A sudden creak split the silence, the unmistakable weight of a foot pressing down above her. She froze, staring upward into the darkness, when another step followed, slower, heavier, deliberate. With each sound, the ceiling groaned, and the air grew colder. A faint shadow shifted across the landing, too tall to be hers, its limbs impossibly long. Claire whispered to herself, "It's empty. It has to be empty." But her words evaporated in the stillness. The staircase vibrated, dust falling from the ceiling. Then a whisper floated down from the shadows. "Come closer." Her phone flickered, revealing damp footprints. Claire's legs trembled as she forced herself up the staircase, each step groaning under her weight. The storm's howl seeped through broken panes above, scattering droplets across the landing like icy needles. Her phone beam slid along the wall and froze on a mirror, cracked and clouded with grime. For a heartbeat, she saw herself, pale, wide-eyed. But as the light flickered, another face appeared over her shoulder, a gaunt figure with an open, twisting mouth. She spun, the landing empty, yet the mirror still quivered as if touched. A wet drip struck her neck. She reached up, but her fingers came away red. Looking up, her stomach knotted. Dark stains spread slowly across the ceiling, dripping in steady rhythm. The sound wasn't just water. It was a gurgling breath. Something moved in the crawl space above. Claire stumbled back from the reaching hand, her scream swallowed by thunder. Dust and splinters rained down as the ceiling cracked wider, revealing a hollow cavity. Her phone light caught something shifting inside, a pale face pressed between beams, its eyes rolling blindly, mouth twitching as if trying to form words. A guttural breath rasped from its throat, fogging the wood with moisture. She backed against the railing, heart hammering, but the floor shuddered with heavy footsteps behind her. Whirling around, she found only darkness. Yet the boards trembled, as if something enormous moved across them. The mirror at the end of the landing glowed faintly, now reflecting dozens of blurred silhouettes crowding close. Then the ceiling gave way entirely, and the figure from above dropped halfway through, arms writhing unnaturally long, grasping for her with wet, snapping joints. Claire bolted, her footsteps pounding across the landing as the grotesque thing clawed through the ceiling. She raced into a nearby bedroom, slamming the door behind her. But the wood vibrated instantly, as if pressed from the other side. Rainwater streamed through a shattered window, soaking torn curtains and drenching the faded bedspread. She pressed herself against the wall, her phone light darting across broken furniture. The beam froze on a child's rocking horse, its paint cracked and peeling. Slowly it began to move, creaking back and forth on its own. Claire's breath caught as a giggle echoed, high, sharp, and wrong, coming from beneath the bed. She crouched, trembling, and lowered her light. Two small eyes gleamed back at her, reflecting white. The horse rocked harder, crashing against the wall, as something under the bed hissed, "Play with us." The bed shook violently, forcing Claire backward. A childlike shape crawled out, its limbs bending unnaturally, face shrouded in dripping hair. Another followed, then another, pale bodies scuttling across the floor like insects. Their laughter was distorted, echoing from every corner. Claire scrambled for the door, wrenching it open, as a small hand clawed her ankle, nails digging deep. She screamed, kicking free, and stumbled into the hallway once more. The corridor pulsed with shadows, darker than the storm outside, twisting like smoke. Her phone flickered violently, each flash revealing the children closer, their hollow faces stretching with toothless grins. She hurled herself down the stairs, landing hard as her phone skidded away. In the dim glow, she saw the front door at last, ajar, swaying with the wind. But just as she reached for it, the door slammed shut with an ear-splitting crack. Claire pounded her fists against the door, splinters cutting her hands. but it would not open. The storm howled outside, mocking her desperation. Behind her, the children's laughter gave way to silence, unnatural, smothering silence. Slowly she turned, the foyer stretching into endless shadow. The rocking of the house echoed as though something massive moved within its walls. Her phone, still lying nearby, buzzed to life, its cracked screen glowing. She reached for it, but froze. The device displayed a live feed of herself, standing in the foyer, with dozens of figures gathered silently behind her. She whipped around, heart seizing, nothing there. Yet the phone continued to show them, pale and patient, surrounding her. One by one, the figures in the screen lifted their heads, their eyes luminous and empty, as a voice whispered from the device itself, "You're one of us now." Terror surged through Claire as she hurled the phone across the room, its screen shattering against the wall. The glow faded, but the foyer remained heavy with unseen eyes. A sudden crash echoed above, footsteps pounding down the stairs. She backed away, staring as shadows thickened, curling along the railing like ink spilling through wood. From the staircase descended a tall, gaunt figure, soaked as if it had walked straight from the storm. Its face was obscured by dripping strands of hair, but its hands, impossibly long, clutched the banister with cracking knuckles. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, its joints bending with sickening snaps. Claire stumbled into the parlor, slamming the door, only for the fireplace inside to roar with sudden flame. In its glow, she saw dozens of faces pressed against the window, watching. Thunder boomed, but none of them blinked. The fire crackled unnaturally, flames leaping too high, throwing warped shadows across the parlor walls. Claire pressed herself against a corner, trembling as the faces at the window slowly faded, leaving only dripping glass. The heat intensified, suffocating, until her eyes watered. Then, within the fire, a figure began to form, charred black, its body twisting, skin cracking like burning wood. Its mouth gaped wide, releasing a hollow moan that cut through the roar of the storm. Claire grabbed a rusted poker from the hearth, brandishing it with shaking hands. But the figure stepped out of the flames, dragging embers with every move. The floorboards sizzled where it walked, leaving scorched prints. She stumbled toward the back door, but it swung open before she reached it. A blast of rain slamming her against the wall. In the threshold stood the Claire darted past the burned figure, rushing into the kitchen, water dripping from every crack in the ceiling. The storm poured through shattered panes, puddles spreading across the tile floor. She slipped, slamming into a counter, as pots rattled overhead. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, swinging wildly, its light flickering with each surge of thunder. In the reflection of its glass, she caught sight of movement, pale arms crawling across the cabinets, dragging unseen bodies. Her breath fogged the air, though the kitchen burned with unnatural heat. A cupboard door creaked open behind her. She turned, only to find her own reflection staring back, her face pale, her mouth twisted into a grin she wasn't wearing. The reflection's hand reached out through the cupboard, fingers dripping with rainwater, stretching toward her throat. Claire staggered back, knocking over a chair as the reflection clawed toward her. The cupboard slammed shut with a deafening crack, splinters scattering across the floor. The air grew unbearably still, as if the storm outside had paused to listen. Then a rhythmic dripping echoed, louder with each second. She followed the sound, horrified to see water on the ceiling defying gravity, rising upward instead of falling down. The puddles on the floor rippled violently, though no step disturbed them. Her phone buzzed from the floor where she had dropped it earlier, screen glowing despite its cracks. Crawling forward, she hesitated before picking it up. A message glowed across the display. "Go upstairs." She dropped it instantly, heart pounding. From the ceiling above, the dripping ceased, replaced by heavy, dragging footsteps moving directly overhead. Claire crept back into the hallway, every instinct screaming to run, yet her legs obeyed the message. The staircase loomed again, darker now, the shadows clinging to its steps like thick tar. Each footfall she made was answered by another, heavier and slower, directly above. As she climbed, the air thickened, her breath labored. Halfway up, the railing writhed beneath her grip, the wood softening into something damp and fleshy. She recoiled, nearly falling backward. At the top, the corridor stretched unnaturally long, its end vanishing into haze. Rain pounded the roof, but it sounded distant, muffled, as though she had stepped outside of time. A door creaked open ahead, light spilling from its crack. She moved toward it, but the floor beneath her bulged upward, as though something massive crawled beneath the boards, waiting to break through. The bulging floorboards split with a sharp crack, and Claire jumped aside just as a skeletal hand burst through, clawing at the air. More followed, pale arms writhing, dragging half-formed bodies into the corridor. Their faces sagged like melted wax, eyes rolling, mouths gasping for breath that never came. She sprinted toward the glowing door, the creatures scrambling after her, their limbs snapping against the floor with sickening speed. The door slammed shut just as she reached it, the light extinguished, leaving her in darkness. Then from the black, two eyes ignited, a deep, fiery red, hovering at the door's center. They blinked once, and the sound of a lock clicked. Slowly, the door swung inward, revealing only an endless staircase spiraling downward into blackness. The creatures behind her wailed, but none dared follow. Claire hesitated at the threshold, staring into the staircase that coiled endlessly into shadow. The storm sound faded completely, replaced by a faint whisper drifting upward, impossible to decipher, yet drawing her in. With trembling hands, she clutched the railing, this time cold and metallic, and descended. The air grew damp, smelling of rot and soil, as though she were being pulled underground. The deeper she went, the walls narrowed, closing in, until her shoulders brushed their sides. A dim lantern hung crookedly on a nail, its flame guttering. When she reached for it, the flame flared, casting dozens of shadows, none belonging to her. They moved independently, twisting grotesquely, their clawed hands reaching out from the walls, as if desperate to drag her into the stone. The staircase spilled into a subterranean chamber lined with dripping stone and skeletal remains chained to the walls. Their jaws hung open in silent screams, water dripping from hollow sockets. Claire's breath fogged as she crept inside, the chamber's chill biting into her skin. At the center stood an ancient wooden chair, its seat soaked dark with something unidentifiable. Strapped to its arms were leather cuffs, worn but unbroken. As she neared, the skeletons rattled faintly, chains clinking in unison. A low moan reverberated through the chamber, and one of the skulls turned slowly toward her, jaw creaking. She stumbled backward, only for the chair to creak louder, its leather straps tightening as though welcoming her. The shadows in the corners deepened, and from them emerged shapes, faceless and hollow. The faceless figures advanced, their steps soundless on the wet stone. Claire pressed herself against the wall, gasping as one leaned close, its hollow head tilting as if listening. From within its featureless face, a scream erupted, not from it, but from deep inside her own ears, vibrating through her skull. She clamped her hands over them, but the sound only grew louder. The chained skeletons clattered wildly, their bones thrashing against the stone as though animated by the shriek. Desperate, Claire stumbled toward the far side of the chamber, where a narrow tunnel opened. She crawled into it, scraping her arms on jagged rock. Behind her, the faceless shapes did not follow. Instead, they simply stood, their empty heads tilting in unison, watching as she vanished into the darkness of the passage. The tunnel seemed endless, narrowing until Claire had to crawl on her belly, stones scraping her skin. Her breaths echoed unnaturally, each exhale sounding like a second voice imitating her. When she paused, the imitation continued, gasping just behind her ear. Panic drove her forward until she spilled into another chamber. This one was smaller, its ceiling low, covered in damp roots, dangling like skeletal fingers. At the center lay a shallow pool, water rippling, though nothing touched it. She leaned closer, and her reflection appeared. Not her current self, but a pale, drenched corpse with hollow eyes. The reflection smiled, lips splitting wider than humanly possible. Suddenly, a hand shot from the water, gripping her wrist with impossible strength, dragging her toward the surface of the pool. That, Claire thrashed, pulling free as the water's surface erupted. A figure rose from the pool, its body bloated, skin sloughing off in strips. Its hollow eyes stared, mouth gaping as foul water gushed out. It lurched toward her, each step dripping with decay, the roots above trembling violently as though reacting to its presence. She scrambled back against the wall, searching for any escape, when her hand struck loose stone. Behind it, a crack widened, releasing a gust of icy air. She squeezed through, just as the creature's hand slammed down, claws raking the wall where she'd been. On the other side, she stumbled into another corridor, but instead of stone, its walls were lined with wallpaper, faded, peeling, and familiar. She was back inside the house, though impossibly deeper than before. The corridor stretched unnaturally, lined with peeling wallpaper that seemed to breathe with each flicker of lightning outside. Claire ran her fingers along the damp surface, only to jerk away as it pulsed beneath her touch, warm and faintly beating, like flesh. She hurried forward, passing framed portraits that hadn't been there before. Each depicted a different figure, gaunt faces with hollow eyes, their gazes following her as she moved. At the far end, a door stood ajar, leaking a faint yellow glow. She pushed it open and stepped into a child's bedroom. Toys scattered across the floor. A rocking horse swayed on its own, creaking in rhythm with her heartbeat. On the bed lay a porcelain doll, cracked and withered, its eyes too lifelike. Slowly, its head turned toward her, and it whispered her name. Claire staggered back, heart pounding as the doll sat upright, joints clicking with unnatural precision. Its cracked lips opened wider, whispering her name again, louder this time, until the sound filled the room. The toys scattered across the floor began to twitch, stuffed animals jerking to life, wooden blocks stacking themselves into crooked towers that spelled out, "Stay." She stumbled toward the door, but it slammed shut behind her. The rocking horse toppled violently, splintering into pieces, while the doll's cracked face split open, revealing a second face within, gaunt, skeletal, and grinning. The whisper turned into a shriek, rattling the windows, shattering the bulb above. In the darkness, the toys froze, their glassy eyes glimmering faintly, watching her as if awaiting command. Claire pressed against the wall, her breath ragged, as faint moonlight leaked through the shattered window. The toys remained motionless, their shadows stretching unnaturally across the room. She grabbed a chair, hurling it against the locked door, but it barely cracked. Behind her, soft giggles echoed, though no mouth had moved. The doll now stood at the center of the room, taller, its limbs elongating, joints bending backward. It leaned forward, its skeletal inner face smiling wider. Suddenly, the blocks toppled, rearranging themselves into new words, below. The floorboards beneath her feet trembled, groaning as if something massive pressed against them from below. Before she could react, a section of the floor caved in, collapsing into blackness, pulling her and the doll into the void. Claire crashed onto damp soil, the air reeking of mildew and rot. She groaned, pushing herself upright, realizing she was in a vast underground nursery. Rusted cribs lined the walls, their bars bent, sheets stained yellow and brown. The porcelain doll lay shattered nearby, its skeletal face twitching before disintegrating into dust. As she stumbled forward, lullabies filled the air, sung in voices layered and broken, echoing from every direction. The cribs rattled, rocking violently through empty. Then, one by one, skeletal infants clawed their way out, their skulls cracked, eyes hollow sockets glowing faintly. They crawled toward her, dragging themselves on brittle arms, their chorus of lullabies twisting into shrill cries. She backed against a crib, only for skeletal hands to grip her ankle from inside. Claire screamed, kicking free just as the skeletal infants surged toward her, their tiny bones snapping under their own weight as they clawed forward. She sprinted across the nursery, cribs toppling in her wake, their bars twisting into claw-like shapes that reached for her. At the far end, she saw a faint doorway, glowing faintly blue, a sliver of hope in the nightmare. But the wails of the skeletal infants rose higher, shaking the walls until cracks spread through the ceiling, showering her in dirt and dust. The ground beneath her rippled like water, skeletal arms bursting from below, grasping at her legs. With every step, they tried to drag her under. She lunged desperately for the glowing doorway, her fingertips brushing the frame as the floor gave way. Claire tumbled through the glowing doorway, crashing onto a marble floor slick with condensation. The room around her was vast, a ballroom frozen in decay. Chandeliers hung crookedly, their crystals dripping water as if weeping. Faded wallpaper peeled in long strips, and tables were set with rotting food, crawling with insects. Music drifted faintly from nowhere, a waltz scratched and warped as though played on a broken record. At the center, ghostly figures swayed in pairs, their forms translucent, faces blurred, spinning endlessly to the distorted tune. Claire froze, her breath clouding, as one figure broke from the dance. Its faceless head turned toward her, and though it had no mouth, the music stopped instantly. Silence fell heavy, and all the dancers turned their blank gazes to her in unison. The ghostly dancers glided toward her, their movements silent yet swift, trailing mist across the floor. Claire darted between them, their cold forms brushing her skin like ice water. She shoved past a table, sending plates shattering, only for the food to pulse and writhe, sprouting maggots that squirmed across the marble. The faceless figure that first noticed her floated inches above the ground, stretching its limbs unnaturally, arms widening like shadows cast by firelight. Its chest split open with a wet crack, revealing rows of glistening teeth where no stomach should be. From its hollow body, the distorted waltz began to play again, louder, vibrating through her bones. Covering her ears, she sprinted toward a grand staircase at the far end, but every step felt heavier, as though invisible hands clutched at her ankles. Claire hauled herself up the grand staircase, each step echoing too long, as if the house itself amplified her struggle. At the landing, the music ceased again, replaced by whispers slithering through the air. The portraits along the walls, lavish paintings of nobles, warped before her eyes, their elegant faces melting into skeletal visages, mouths stretching wide as if screaming silently. She hurried past, but one portrait's figure stepped out of its frame, blocking her path. Its body was painted flat, brushstrokes visible, yet it moved in 3 dimensions, its eyes hollow swirls of darkness. It raised a hand, paint dripping from its fingertips, which hissed like acid as it struck the floor. Claire turned and bolted down another hall, the walls narrowing behind her as the painted figure stepped fully into reality. A hallway twisted unnaturally, folding in on itself. Wallpaper writhing like veins pulsing beneath skin. Claire stumbled forward, her reflection flickering in every cracked picture frame she passed. Each reflection lagged behind, moving seconds later, their expressions twisted in fear she hadn't shown yet. The air thickened, tasting metallic, as if she were breathing rust. Behind her, the painted figure's dripping footsteps hissed closer, searing holes in the carpet. She reached a door and flung it open, slamming it behind her. The room inside was a study, bookshelves lining the walls, but the books shivered, pages fluttering as if alive. A heavy tome slid from a shelf and cracked open on the desk, its pages blank except for one line. "You cannot leave." The words bled across the paper, dripping onto the floor. Claire staggered back from the desk as more words scrawled themselves across the book in frantic strokes. "He is coming." The shelves rattled violently, volumes launching outward, pages tearing mid-air. She shielded herself, ducking as the storm of books crashed around her. The study door rattled, hinges screeching, as something pounded from the other side. A deep growl seeped through the wood, vibrating through the floorboards. The desk split in two, spilling the tome onto the ground. Its pages burst into flames without smoke, the fire swirling upward, forming a shape, horned, skeletal, its eye sockets burning with blue light. It bent low, crawling from the fire, as if birthed by the book itself. The pounding on the door stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of flames as the creature stepped closer. Claire stumbled backward as the horned skeletal figure emerged fully, its body twisted from smoke and flame. The blue fire in its sockets flared brighter, casting warped shadows across the study walls. Each step it took left scorch marks on the floor, the scent of sulfur thickening the air. She grabbed a fallen chair, hurling it at the creature, but it passed through, igniting instantly. The figure's jaw cracked open, releasing a guttural hiss that echoed like hundreds of voices speaking at once. Bookshelves collapsed, their spines curling in the heat, while the windows sealed with black tar, cutting off all escape. The monster lowered its skull-like head, pointing a bony claw directly at Claire. The floor beneath her glowed red, burning with molten cracks, as if the house itself were opening to swallow her alive. The molten cracks split wider, the floor trembling violently as heat scorched Claire's skin. She leapt toward the far wall, clawing at a window, but the tar sealing it pulsed like flesh, resisting her every strike. Behind her, the creature advanced slowly, savoring her panic. It raised both arms, and the flames along its body flared, swirling into a vortex that sucked books, furniture, and shards of glass into its core. Claire screamed, shielding her face as the room bent inward, the gravity pulling her toward the blazing spiral. Desperate, she spotted a trap door revealed beneath a collapsed shelf. With all her strength, she dove, slamming it open and tumbling down a narrow shaft. The door slammed shut above her, muffling the roar of the demon. She landed hard in silence, the air around her icy and still. Claire groaned as she stood, brushing dust from her trembling hands. The shaft had dropped her into a cavernous cellar, colder than any place she'd been. The stone walls dripped with condensation, and faint whispers echoed, though the space seemed empty. Along the walls stood rows of wooden barrels, their surfaces cracked, leaking a dark liquid that smelled metallic, like blood. She stepped closer, running her hand across one, when it shuddered. The lid splintered, and a pale hand shot out, clawing the air. One by one, the barrels cracked open, skeletal figures crawling free, drenched in the crimson liquid. Their hollow eyes fixed on her, their jaws clattering in unison, like teeth chattering. Claire staggered backward, heart hammering, as dozens of skeletal wraiths pulled themselves out, advancing slowly, their bodies dripping red. Claire darted between the barrels, sprinting as the skeletal wraiths followed, their wet limbs slapping against the stone. The cellar stretched longer than it should, the ceiling lowering until she had to duck beneath beams. Ahead, she spotted a narrow archway glowing faintly. She dove through, slamming into another chamber. Here, the walls pulsed faintly, veins spreading across the stone, glowing with dim blue light. A pool lay at the center, its surface glassy. She edged closer, but the water rippled on its own, and shapes began to form within, faces pressing against the surface, their eyes opening. Their mouths moved silently, mouthing words she could almost hear. She leaned forward, straining, when suddenly the water erupted, and dozens of arms shot upward, clawing, dragging at her legs with desperate strength. Claire thrashed violently, yanking free from the arms, her skin burning where their icy grip touched. She crawled across the slick stone floor as the water roared behind her, the faces in the pool screaming silently. At the far side, a staircase spiraled upward, lit faintly by lanterns, flickering as though they'd burn out at any second. She scrambled up, each step groaning under her weight. Halfway, the lanterns extinguished one by one, plunging her into darkness. A whisper slithered up the stairs, close to her ear, though nothing was there. "You shouldn't have come." She froze, trembling, before forcing herself to continue. At the top, she shoved open a wooden door, stumbling into a familiar space. The upstairs hallway of the mansion again, though more rotted. The walls breathing like lungs. The hallway pulsed faintly with each creak of the storm outside, though it no longer looked entirely real. The floorboards seemed liquid, rippling beneath her steps. Portraits hung crooked, their painted eyes bleeding down the frames. A door at the far end thudded violently, shaking as though something massive beat against it from the other side. Claire backed away, but another door opened beside her with a slow groan. Inside was a bedroom, lit dimly by a candle. A woman sat on the bed, her back turned, hair long and black. "Hello?" Claire whispered. Slowly, the woman turned her head, revealing a face stitched together with black thread, eyes sewn shut, mouth forced into a grotesque grin. The candle snuffed out instantly, and the stitched woman rose, dragging metal chains across the floor. The stitched woman shuffled forward, chains screeching as they dragged behind her. Claire stumbled back into the hallway, slamming the door, but the chains lashed through the wood, tearing splinters like paper. The hallway warped, its length doubling, twisting. She ran, feet sinking into the soft, rippling floor. But the chains pursued, wrapping around her ankle, burning cold. Claire screamed, clawing free, skin tearing as she kicked away. She spotted a door ajar ahead and flung herself inside. It was a nursery, walls peeling, a crib in the center rocking on its own. The stitched woman's chains rattled closer, then stopped. The crib's cover shifted, and inside lay not an infant, but a blackened skull, its jaw clicking as it whispered, "She belongs to us now." The whispering skull's voice deepened, echoing like a chorus of children crying in unison. Claire backed away, but the nursery door slammed shut behind her, locking with an iron clang. The rocking crib burst into flames, yet no smoke rose. Instead, shadowy figures crawled from the fire, small and childlike, their limbs grotesquely bent. They surrounded her, their hollow eyes glowing faint blue. Claire grabbed a broken crib rail, swinging wildly, scattering them. But more emerged from the burning cradle. She spotted a boarded-up window, rushed forward, and smashed the wood with the rail. Rain poured in instantly, dousing the flames. The shadows shrieked, vanishing in smoke. She climbed through the window, tumbling onto a balcony where the storm raged, lightning illuminating the endless woods below. Claire gasped for breath on the balcony, the storm lashing her face. The forest stretched endlessly, trees swaying violently, though the wind here was still. Below, shadows shifted unnaturally, darting between trunks. A flash of lightning revealed dozens of figures, standing among the trees, all staring upward at her. Their faces were pale, blurred, like unfinished paintings. She staggered back, gripping the railing, when the balcony beneath her feet cracked loudly. The wood splintered, and she tumbled, crashing into the mud below. Groaning, she stood, drenched, as the figures she had seen began moving toward her, slow at first, then faster, their blurred faces warping into gaping mouths. The storm above silenced suddenly, leaving only the pounding of footsteps closing in. Claire ran blindly through the woods, branches clawing at her arms and rain soaking her to the bone. The pale figures followed, never slowing, their mouths widening with each step. She stumbled into a clearing where a cabin stood, its windows glowing faintly. Desperate, she pushed inside, slamming the door behind her. The cabin smelled of mold and rot, the floorboards wet. She turned, realizing the glow came not from lamps, but from candles placed in a circle at the center. Within the circle sat a figure draped in tattered robes, its face hidden beneath a hood. Its voice rasped, echoing unnaturally, "You brought them here." The candles flared, casting long shadows against the walls. Outside, the pale figures clawed at the windows, their screeches rattling the glass. The hooded figure rose slowly, towering unnaturally tall, its face still hidden. Claire stumbled back as it raised its arms, chanting in a language that twisted in her ears like knives. The candles blazed brighter, and the pale figures outside wailed, clawing harder at the walls. Suddenly, the hood fell back, revealing not a face, but a gaping void. Darkness spiraling infinitely. From that void came tendrils of shadow, whipping through the cabin, lashing at the walls, and dragging across the floor. One wrapped around Claire's wrist, burning her skin with icy fire. She screamed, tearing free as the candles blew out, all at once. The cabin plunged into darkness, yet the chanting continued, now echoing from within her own chest, vibrating through her bones. The void-faced figure lurched toward her, its tendrils wrapping around beams and snapping them like twigs. Claire bolted for the door, bursting into the storm once more. But the forest no longer looked real. The trees bent inward, their trunks twisted into humanoid shapes, their branches grasping. She sprinted blindly, the chanting still vibrating inside her, when the ground beneath her feet shifted, soft as quicksand. She sank rapidly, mud clawing at her legs, pulling her under. Desperately, she clawed upward, lightning illuminating her terrified face. Just before the earth swallowed her, she glimpsed the void-faced figure towering at the tree line, its spiraling darkness growing larger. Then the ground gave way completely, and she plunged into blackness, her screams devoured by the storm. Claire landed hard on stone, gasping. She was no longer in the forest, but in a cavernous underground chamber, the air suffocatingly still. The walls glistened with black slime, and torches burned with green fire, casting warped shadows. At the center stood a massive altar, carved from bone, runes glowing faintly. Upon it lay a figure draped in a funeral shroud. Claire crept closer, heart hammering. The shroud shifted suddenly, and the figure beneath sat upright, skeletal fingers clutching its covering. It pulled the cloth away, revealing Claire's own face, eyes wide, skin pallid. The duplicate opened its mouth, but instead of words, a swarm of black insects poured out, filling the chamber with a deafening buzz. Claire screamed, backing into the slime-slick wall as the insects swirled toward her in a suffocating cloud. She swatted desperately, choking on the cloud of insects. They vanished as suddenly as they appeared, leaving silence that rang louder than screams. Claire's duplicate was gone, but the altar now bore a massive tome bound in skin, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Against all instinct, she opened it. The pages were blank at first, but then words scrawled themselves in black ink. Write her story in blood. Her fingers trembled as a quill appeared, dripping red. She dropped it instantly, horrified. The runes on the altar glowed brighter, and the walls of the chamber began to tremble. A deep growl echoed from the shadows beyond the torchlight. Slowly, massive claws scraped against the stone floor, approaching, unseen, yet impossibly close. From the shadows, a colossal beast emerged, its body formed of fused human torsos writhing endlessly, screaming mouths sewn shut. Its eyes burned white, too bright to look at directly. The ground shook as it stepped closer, its claws tearing gouges into stone. Claire fled, ducking beneath stalactites, slipping on the slime-coated floor. The creature roared, its many mouths opening in unison with a deafening wail. She darted into a tunnel, barely squeezing through as its claws swiped inches from her back. Darkness swallowed her, only her ragged breaths echoing. Then, faintly ahead, she saw light. A staircase spiraling upward, impossibly tall, vanishing into pitch black. With no choice, she began climbing, the beast's roar still reverberating behind her. The spiral staircase seemed endless, her legs burning as she climbed, the stones slick with moisture. Behind her, faint thuds echoed. Something was following. She turned once, spotting shadows racing upward at unnatural speed, clawing along the steps. Panic fueled her climb. At last, a trapdoor loomed above. She shoved it open, pulling herself into a dim attic. The space was low, beams jutting like broken ribs. Dust choked the air. At the far end stood a mirror, taller than her, draped with a black cloth. As she approached, it shifted slightly, as though something inside pressed outward. The cloth slipped away, revealing not her reflection, but a darker version of herself. Skin cracked, eyes black, smiling wickedly. The double raised its hand in greeting. The reflection moved independently, mimicking none of Claire's actions. It tapped the glass, and cracks spread outward like lightning. She stumbled back, but the dark double pressed harder, forcing its way through. Shards rained onto the attic floor as it stepped out fully, identical but warped, its movements sharp, unnatural. The attic shook violently, dust and wood raining down. Claire grabbed a beam for balance as her double lunged, eyes burning with malice. They grappled, mirror shards cutting into their skin, blood soaking the floorboards. Her double whispered, voice like a chorus of demons, "Only one of us survives." Claire's scream tore through the attic as she slammed her double against the beam, glass shards embedding deeper. The attic collapsed suddenly, floorboards splintering beneath their struggle. Both figures crashed downward, slamming into a grand dining hall below. The long table was set with rotting food and skeletal guests slumped in chairs, cobwebs draping their faces. Claire coughed, rolling aside as her double rose, seemingly unhurt. The skeletons turned their heads simultaneously, their jaws opening wide in a hollow laugh. Candles on the table flared with black fire, and the laughter grew louder. Claire grabbed a broken chair leg as her double lunged again, slamming it into her shoulder. The skeletal guests clapped soundlessly, as though entertained by the violence, their eyeless sockets fixed on the duel. Claire swung wildly, her weapon cracking against her double skull. It staggered, but did not fall. Instead, the dark version grinned wider, pulling shards of glass from its chest and hurling them like daggers. Claire dove behind the table, wood splintering as the shards embedded deep. Suddenly, the skeletons rose, surrounding her, their bony hands reaching. She bolted, weaving through them as her double gave chase. She reached the far end of the hall, where a pair of massive doors stood. With all her strength, she shoved them open, stumbling into a cathedral-like chamber where stained glass windows depicted scenes of fire and torment. The doors slammed behind her, sealing her inside. The cathedral's ceiling soared into darkness, its windows glowing faintly from lightning outside. At the altar stood a massive crucifix, but instead of Christ, it bore a twisted figure with horns, nailed through its limbs, its eyes glowing faint red. Claire staggered back as the nailed figure's head jerked, snapping upright. Its voice boomed across the chamber. "Blood seals the bond." The stained glass shattered, shards raining down as shadowy forms slipped inside, circling her. Her double appeared again, stepping from the shadows, smiling as though this had always been its domain. The horned figure tore itself free of the crucifix, crashing to the floor, towering above them both. The horned figure raised its clawed hand, the shadows tightening around Claire like chains. Her double approached, placing its hand on her chest. "You're the sacrifice," it whispered. Pain shot through her as her heartbeat echoed unnaturally loud, shaking the chamber. The horned figure chanted, runes glowing along the walls, and the shadows began draining into Claire, burning her from the inside. Her double's eyes flared brighter, feeding off her agony, summoning the last of her strength. She grabbed a fallen shard of stained glass and drove it into her double's chest. A blinding light erupted, tearing through the cathedral, the shadows shrieking as they dissolved into smoke. The light consumed everything until silence reigned. Claire opened her eyes, finding herself back in her living room, rain tapping gently against the window. The storm had passed. She sat trembling, the clock on the wall ticking softly. For a moment, she believed it had all been a dream. Then, she noticed the cut on her wrist from the shadow tendril, still fresh, still burning. Her reflection in the dark window pane blinked and smiled back at her. The lights flickered, the room's air grew colder, and faint whispers returned. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she realized the mansion, the forest, the cathedral. None of it had ended. It had followed her home.